Well, how many of you've ever made a dumb decision? Anybody ever made a dumb decision? Just raise your hand. This is church, we can be honest. If you're not raising your hand, we're going to ask you what your dumb decision that you don't want to raise your hand about, like after the service, and you're like, please don't acknowledge me. I can't, there are so many dumb decisions that I've made that I'm like, should I bore them with all my dumb decisions? And there's just stupid things that I've done over the years. Like, I was a single dad for a few years, and I remember the first time I took my girls, they were probably 3 and 5 at the time, to a theme park by myself. That was a dumb decision because of bathroom times. Like, I didn't even go to the bathroom all day. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? And then taking them, like, I'm not going to let them go in the women's restroom by themselves. So should I take them to the guys' restroom? It was just like dumb. Like, what am I doing? And so there's so many things that I've looked over, whether it's been parenting, whether it's in marriage. My wife can get up and testify of all the dumb things that I do and say. And the idea is that we all do dumb stuff all the time. I just saw a clip this morning of a family yesterday who they saw this huge candy bucket, and it was her and her husband and their 3 or 4 kids. They go up to the bucket. I mean, it's a large bucket. They stole the entire bucket of candy. And they're like getting their kids in. And what I love about the clip is the family leaves. The dad goes back to check one more time in the bucket to make sure there's nothing there. And I'm like, all right, this is a dumb family. Like, what is wrong with these parents? Like, you're making dumb decisions. And the reason I'm talking about this is because tonight we're actually going to get into a book of wisdom. So if you ever made a dumb decision, I've got a perfect book for you to jump into because it is all about making wise choices. In fact, if you want to amuse yourself or find people doing dumb things, all you need to do is go on YouTube because foolishness reigns on that channel and that site. Now, 2 weeks ago, we looked at money as taught by Jesus. And we looked at all the teachings of Jesus, all the words in red of what Jesus taught about money. And I didn't need to introduce Jesus because we know who Jesus is. Even if you didn't grow up in church, you've heard of the name Jesus. You have some understanding. But tonight, I want to do a quick introduction of who we're going to look at. And that is the guy who wrote most of the book of Proverbs. His name was Solomon. And so if you have your Bible, turn over to 1 Kings chapter number 3, or even if you have the church app, you can open it up. And we're going to look at several verses tonight. And my goal is to go to finish a little bit early because I want us to do something together that I believe the Lord told me before I came on. But turn over to 1 Kings chapter 3. Let's look at who Solomon was very quickly. Just introduce him to you so you know who he is. Many of you, maybe you've heard of the name or perhaps you haven't. And I want you to know who wrote most of the verses we're going to read tonight. Solomon, we find in 1 Kings chapter number 3, he just becomes the king of Israel. His dad was a guy you probably heard of. His name was David. He was the guy who killed Goliath, he killed the bear. He was running from Saul, and now he became king, and then he passed away, and now Solomon is becoming the king of Israel. So verse number 5, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at night, and God said, ask, what should I give you? Now, this is where people think that God is our genie and he is just here to give us all of our wishes. Some of you think this is your life verse. You're like, God, please just ask that you can give me anything. And this is what happened to Solomon. Solomon says in verse number 6, you have shown great and faithful love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, righteousness, and integrity. You've continued this great and faithful love for him by giving him a son to sit on his throne as it is today. Lord my God, you have now made your servant king in my father David's place, yet I am just a youth with no experience in leadership. Your servant is among your people you have chosen, a people too many to be numbered or counted. So give your servant, verse 9, a receptive heart to judge your people and to discern between good and evil. For who is able to judge this great people of yours? Now, if God came to you in a dream and said, my son, my daughter, whatever you want, I'll give you. Some of you don't even need to think about it. You're like, give me more wishes, which that's dumb. Like, don't do that. Like, give me $1 million. Give me this. Give me that. And Solomon, in this story, this scene, he's like, God, you need to give me wisdom. Give me wisdom. So look on in verse number 10. And now it pleased the Lord that Solomon had requested this. So God said to him, because you've requested this wisdom and did not ask for long life or for riches or for the death of your enemies, But you ask discernment for yourself to administer justice. I will therefore do what you've asked. In fact, I will give you a wise and understanding heart so that there has never been anyone like you before and never will be again. Verse 13, in addition, I will give you what you did not ask for, both riches and honor, so that no king will be your equal during your entire life. And then he promises him in verse 14, if you walk in my ways and keep my statutes and commands, just as your father David did, I will give you a long life. So here's the story. Solomon, as he steps into his kingdom, God says, what do you want? And Solomon's like, I need wisdom. And it so impressed God that he was like, all right, I'm not only going to give you wisdom, I'm going to give you a long life. I'm going to give you riches. In fact, Solomon ended up being not only the wisest king who ever lived, but also the richest king who had ever lived because God blessed him beyond his wildest dreams. And so it's this guy who wrote the book of Proverbs that I'm going to look at tonight. Now, I had someone help me, and they compiled all the verses in Proverbs that talk about resources, finances, money. Now, there are 136 verses in Proverbs about resources. So I don't know what you're doing tomorrow, but we've got a long night together because we're going to go through every single one of them. Some of you are like, can I slip out right now? Like, do I need to leave? Some of you online, you're like, all right, I'm just going to turn this guy off. Like 136. I have in your notes 31, but I don't know if we're going to get to all 31 tonight. But tonight is a little bit different than what we normally would do. I really want to do just a quick Bible study. I want to share with you 4 wisdom ways that Solomon writes in this book. And this is the wisest king who ever lived, so we can all learn from him. And I want to share with you just 4 reminders to guide your resources from the wisest king who ever lived. And let's look at money has taught in Proverbs. And so the first way I want to share with you, the first reminder is a simple one, but we find this early on in the book of Proverbs, and that's this. Regarding your resources, regarding your finances, and really even big picture regarding your life, the first action you need to take is to always, number 1, honor God. Honor God. Now this is simple. It sounds simple, but it comes right from Proverbs chapter 3. Look over with me to Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9. It says, honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled and your vats will overflow with new wine. Now here's why Solomon's writing this, and here's what we don't understand. He's saying you need to honor God first, and then God will bless you. But we try to reverse it. We're like, God, please bless me. Please give me more. Please, I need more. I need this. I need this blessing. I need that thing in my life. And God's like, well, what have you been doing with what I've already given to you? Too many times we want more and more and more. And then God's like, well, what are you doing with the more? And you're like, well, I have, nice stuff, and I've got good clothes and nice cars, and God's like, okay, and you're up to your eyeballs in debt. We'll talk about that in a moment. And so how are you honoring me with me giving you more? And you're like, well, good point, God. So what do you want me to do? And so God is telling us, hey, honor God. Now, there's a phrase in here that I want to quickly mention to you, and that's this. In the verse number 9, it says, honor God with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Now, there's a principle here that you'll see throughout scriptures. I don't have time to unpack it completely right now, but it's the principle of first fruits. And the idea was all the way back to Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel. The idea was that you would bring a harvest of your, at that time, of your farming, your agriculture to God, and you present it as a sacrifice to God. And the idea was that every time you harvested corn or tomatoes or whatever you were harvesting, your farming, you would bring that to God, a portion of your first fruits, and then God would bless the rest of it. So that's what we call today the tithe. So what Solomon, again, the wisest person who's ever lived, he says, honor God with your possessions and with a tithe. And then, verse number 10, then God's going to bless you. By the way, not just bless you, but your barns will be completely filled and your vats will overflow with new wine. But the blessing follows the obedience. The blessing follows the honoring. The blessing follows what you and I do first. So God says, all right, here's your job. Here's your inheritance. Here's your allowance. Here's your however stream of income you have. But here is your resources. What are you going to do with it? And God is watching us and says, okay, like a couple weeks ago, we talked about our checkbook or our bank statement of what is our priorities. And God's like, I saw them write a check for that. I saw them take on some more debt. I saw them buy that thing where they already have 7 of them. Why do they do that? And now he's seeing us not honor him with the first fruits or even honor him with wise stewardship. And so let me tell you, and I can see this from experience, and perhaps you can as well, when I am unfaithful in the resources that God's given to me, God is very, very, very slow to give me more. Some of the reasons that we struggle so much is because God's not going to give us more when we can't even be faithful and honor him with the little. So before you ask God for more, what you need to do is go back and say, okay, what am I doing with what God's given to me now? And it's the principle of first fruits. The first reminder that you and I need to have to guide our resources from Solomon is to honor God. But the second one is this, and actually this second thought is the majority of verses in Proverbs talk about this second reminder, and that's this: work hard. Work hard. Now, I read all 136 verses in Proverbs about finances, and not one time did I see a verse that says, pray for a rich uncle to pass away and give you an inheritance. By the way, I'm going to step on some toes, and I would say I don't mean to, but I think I do. What I don't see in here is, hey, play every lottery scratch card you can get, and you may win. I didn't see that. I didn't see, hey, all those get-rich schemes, like, go jump in. In fact, it's the opposite. We'll talk about that in a moment. And what Proverbs is reminding us and what Solomon's telling us is saying, hey, if you want to be a good steward, you need to work hard. Let me give you a couple of verses to remind you of this. In Proverbs chapter 6, verse 6, Solomon writes, since he says, go to the ant, you slacker. Another translation says, you sluggard. Observe its ways and become wise. Because they are without a leader, an administrator, or a ruler, yet they prepare their provisions in the summer. They gather their food during harvest. So, verse number 9, how long will you stay in bed, you slacker? When will you get up from your sleep? A little slumber, a little folding of the arms to rest, and your poverty will come like a robber, your need like a bandit. Solomon's reminding us and saying, hey, if you want more and you're not working hard, then you're going to get nothing. Nothing. And another verse, let me read a couple of verses just in a row to tell you how Solomon's thinking. He says in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 4, idle hands make one poor, but diligent hands bring riches. The diligent hand, Proverbs 12:24 says, will rule, but laziness will lead to forced labor. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22 says, a good man leaves an inheritance, look at this, to his grandchildren. Let me talk about this for a moment. God always thinks generationally. You and I, we think about today. We're like, what do I want for a snack after this service? What am I going to buy with my check on Friday? What do I need this month? What am I going to get for Christmas? What am I going to give for Christmas? And we think right now, and some of that is fine. But often we're not thinking about, now Solomon's saying, it's a given, according to him, it's given that you would leave something for your kids, but he wants to go next level. What are you going to leave for your grandkids? Now, that takes a lot of hard work. That takes a lot of thought. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But here's the idea. The idea is that you and I would one day leave stuff so much for our kids and our grandkids because we also, like God, are thinking generationally. Now, I'm looking around the room. There's a lot of us. There's some grandparents in this room right now, but there's a lot of us that aren't. There's a lot of young adults who you don't have kids yet. There's some like Amy and I are your parents and you have kids, and there's some you have adult children. But the idea is that you and I would begin thinking generationally, because when you and I leave, we don't want to just leave something for our kids. We want to leave something for the generations to come after us. And I think you do that through your family, but I also think you do that through your church family. I think that you and I, as we invest into our church family, we're leaving some things for the generations behind us to come in 50 years and still hear the gospel on this campus. And so when you and I think about working hard, we need to leave behind something for the generations to come, and it's only going to come through hard work. So the question is this: how lazy are you? Are you working hard? Are you going to work and just clocking in and waiting to that moment? You're like watching the clock. All right, I'm clocking out and I'm out of here. Or are you really working hard for the job that God's given to you? Let me tell you, I believe, and Paul tells the early church, he says, for those men who don't provide for their family, they are worse than an infidel, than an unbeliever. And Paul's reminding particularly men in that passage, but we can broaden this to all of us, that we should be, particularly as followers of Jesus, be the hardest workers that your company and organization have. There should not be any lazy people named among Jesus followers. And so let me encourage you, when you go to work tomorrow, you're not just clocking in and clocking out, like, just got to get out of here. You are there for a purpose. You're there for a reason. You're there to work hard, to be a good example, because if you're not going to be a good example as a Jesus follower, let me tell you, the person who doesn't follow Jesus is not going to be the example. And by the way, let me just say one more thing before I move on. If the person that doesn't follow Jesus is a better example of a work ethic than you, then what Jesus are you following? Because Jesus was a hard worker as well. Jesus was the one where he wanted to get away from people and they kept following, and he looked at them and he's like, all right, let's do this. And he goes to heal and he goes to preach and he goes to help and he goes to teach and do all these leadership things. And he was a hard worker, and you and I need to follow the same example. And so Solomon, he reminds us throughout the book of Proverbs, and there's more verses there, that you and I need to work hard. But the third thought he shares with us throughout the book of Proverbs is this: not only should we work hard, but we need to also be smart. Be smart. He talks a lot about, and I want to mention this for a moment. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse 15, he says this: if someone puts up security for a stranger, he will suffer for it. But the one who hates such agreements is protected. And then in verse 24, he says this: one person gives freely, yet gains more. Another withholds what is right, only to become poor. Now, for just a moment, let me just take a quick side rabbit trail, if you will. And what Solomon is writing about, he's writing about loans. He's writing about giving family, extended family, money. So what should you do? When someone asks you and your family, like, hey, can I borrow $1,000? Or hey, can you co-sign a car for me? Or hey, can you help me with this down payment? Or hey, can you help me with this? And that gets into sticky situations. I'm not your financial advisor, but what I am saying from Scripture is that, and here's what I think Solomon's telling us in these verses, and there's some other verses you can look in your notes as well. But if you loan money that must be paid back to you, or else you're going to be in financial dire need, then you shouldn't loan that money out. In fact, you shouldn't actually loan money out to family that you expect to be paid back. So if you're going to give money to family, you just need to say, that's a gift. I don't expect that back. And if you can't do that, then I would encourage you to not do that loan in the first place. You go on throughout Proverbs, and you can't really, as you read through some scriptures, you'll find that when you begin to, he writes that the security or the loan to somebody, when that begins to become your focal point, then you begin to lose sight and you're not being smart with the money that God's given to you. And so I want to encourage you that if you're in those situations, to pray about it, to ask God for wisdom, but to say, God, if I give this $500 away, I'm just going to give it in your name, and then you bring it back if you want, and not go after that family member. And let me encourage you, if you've been on the receiving end of that, maybe a parent or maybe extended family member, as you receive something from them, you got to do your best to pay that back, and make sure that there's no rift in your family because of money. You see, finances is the number one cause of divorce for marriages, but I would also say it's the number one cause of strife in family. We fight about money. We fight about finances. And so Solomon is reminding us and saying, hey, if you do these things, you're going to suffer. So don't loan that money, give that money. I also love what he writes in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. The person who pretends to be rich but has nothing, and another pretends to be poor but has abundant wealth. You see, I think it'd actually be wiser if we were wealthy in our accounts and not wealthy in our appearance. Some of us like to look wealthy. We'll get a nice car. We'll get a crazy wardrobe. We're going to wear all the latest everything, and we're going to look wealthy. And then we go, and we really have nothing. Our closet actually costs more than our house. Our closet costs more than our apartment. Our car costs more than our living space. And Solomon's reminding us and saying, hey, you don't have to pretend to be rich. You just need to put that aside and be smart. The last thing I want to share with you is this, number 4. We looked at this idea of honoring God, of working hard, of being smart, and I'm leaving a lot of verses out that you can look at a little bit later in our sermon notes, but number 4 is this, and this is so important. Don't cheat. Don't cheat. If working hard should be a marker of a follower of Jesus, not cheating should be the second marker of a follower of Jesus. You might ask, well, how do you know if it's shady? You know if it's shady. If you have to ask if it's shady, it's shady. If you're like, Pastor Jeremy, let me run the situation by you, and I want you to tell me if you're cutting corners. I would stop you before you told me the situation and say, you're cutting corners. If you have to ask, is it this? It probably is. Now, I'm not talking about there's some great financial tips, and we've got a whole group up watching Financial Peace University. Dave Ramsey, some other experts can give incredible advice regarding insurance and regarding payments and how you can really maneuver and really work this to your advantage. And I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the things that cross the line. Let me share with you a couple of verses as we wrap up our time together. In Proverbs chapter 11, verse number 1, it says, "Dishonest scales are detestable to the Lord, but an accurate weight is his delight." I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but they used to, back in the 1930s, have this weekly magazine called Saturday Evening Post, and they would often put paintings by Norman Rockwell, who was a well-known painter at that time, and I have a cover that was particularly well received, and I think it was 1936, and it was an illustration of what happened at the grocery stores at those days, and so it was a cover of a magazine where the lady is weighing chicken, and we might not have it, so I can, there it is. They're weighing a chicken, and the lady, she's pushing the scale up to make the chicken weigh less. The clerk is pushing his finger on the scale down to make the chicken weigh more, because they're both trying to get what they want. But let me tell you, they're both being dishonest. And so many times you and I, we can go through our life and we think that we're being savvy. We think we're being wise. But God would actually say you're just being dishonest. Stop cheating, because that's not going to get you ahead. In fact, in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 17, Solomon writes, he says, "Food gained by fraud is sweet to a person, but afterward his mouth is full of gravel." It's this idea when you and I think that we got a good deal, and then we're like, oh, wait, I just shafted a person. Why did I do that? In fact, Proverbs 22:1 reminds us a good name is to be chosen over great wealth, and favor is better than silver and gold. Proverbs 28, verse 6, better the poor person who lives with integrity than the rich one who distorts right and wrong. And finally, in Proverbs 28, verse 20, a faithful person will have many blessings, but one in a hurry to get rich will not go unpunished. A greedy one is in a hurry for wealth, verse 22. He doesn't know that poverty will come to him. You see, we're going to get really practical on Sunday, November the 12th, with Joe Sengel, and we're going to help you with your budgeting and saving and debt retirement and all those things. But these are simple principles from the wisest person who ever lived, Solomon. And the 4 wisdom ways that he shares with us and reminds us is, hey, honor God with the first fruits that he's given to you. Hey, make sure you are working hard. Make sure that you are doing things that are not cutting corners or being lazy, because God is not going to bless laziness. But then as you're working hard, be smart. If you're going to make a loan, just give it away. If you're going to make an investment, make sure it's wise. If you're going to just risk something, make sure, husbands, you get together with your wives, or wives, you get together with your husbands. Make sure you do it together, but be smart about that. And then finally, don't cheat. Don't cheat God. Don't cheat yourself. Don't cheat your company, because that is not a way to get ahead. I was thinking about biblical stewardship in regards to Jesus' death on the cross. And there's a moment before Jesus is betrayed and beaten and crucified. And it's what we know as communion, as the Last Supper. We celebrate that. In fact, we'll do it this Sunday here at our services, where we celebrate eating the bread and drinking the cup. But as I was thinking about that with stewardship, I was thinking about Jesus. He didn't allow anything to go to waste. He let his body be broken. He shed his blood. And in fact, all the things that happened to him were prophesied thousands of years before. And it's a reminder that as Jesus lived 33 years in this life, he didn't cut corners. He was smart. He worked hard. He didn't cheat anybody. In fact, when the disciples came and they tried to get Jesus to help them kind of escape their taxes, when he was like, God, Jesus, I mean, we don't really need to give these things to Caesar, right? Can you help us cut some corners on our taxes? And Jesus is like, nope, you need to render to Caesar what is Caesar's. Because he felt that, and he lived by and he led by example that we need to live above board. And so Jesus, as he was on the cross, he offered up himself for you and for me. He did that because he knew that 2,000 years later, there'd be a group here and a group all around the world that would be meeting together and that would be talking through his word and looking at his principles and a countercultural way to live. And he wanted us to know and wanted us to live by being a good steward of everything. Jesus was even a good steward of his body. He was a good steward that made sure that he lived a sinless life so that when his blood was shed, it was powerful enough that it would save us. That's why we read in Hebrews, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins, because Jesus was a steward of his life. So I want to encourage you, if you have never said yes to God, if you've never made that profession, that declaration that says, God, I know that I've done wrong, but would you please come in? Let me tell you, you're not going to be a good steward of everything else until you're a good steward of your soul. And Jesus has made a way for you and I to say yes to him. We're going to actually, in just a moment before our worship team, they're going to come back in a minute. And I just have felt as I was over there thinking about this moment and praying for this message and for you that we're going to take a moment to pray together. And I'm going to pray with you. If you've never said yes, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that. But we're going to just get in some groups with your friends or with your family. If you're here by yourself, there's going to be a friendly face around you that we'd love to pray with you as well. But as we go into this season of stewardship, of holidays, of just stuff, I believe that it's important for us as a church to pray together. That binds us together. That encourages us together. And so would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me as I wrap up this time and as we get ready to pray with each other and for each other? If you've never said yes to God and you've never prayed that prayer and you've said, God, I know that I've done wrong. Would you please come into my life and forgive me? I won't embarrass you. I just want to pray with you before we move on into our service. Is there anybody in this room, and no one's looking around, every head is bowed, every eye's closed. I won't embarrass you. I won't ask you to stand, come forward. I won't call out your name. But I want to pray for you. I want to lead you into a short prayer. Is there anybody in this room that would say, Pastor Jeremy, I realize Jesus did pay for my sins. I have a debt I couldn't pay, and he paid it for me. And I want to ask him to forgive me. If that's you, and you say, Pastor Jeremy, would you pray with me? It would be my absolute honor, my greatest joy to pray with you. Is there anybody in this room that would say, Pastor Jeremy, would you pray with me? I see you. What a great decision that you're making. I see you. I see you guys in the back. You guys are making an incredible decision. I see you. I see you. So grateful for all of you, your honesty on my left, and incredible. Thank you for being here, saying yes, I see you. I agree with you. If you're watching online, you can join us. There's many hands in this room that were raised, and our God's everywhere. For those of you that raised your hand, for those of you watching online that want to pray this prayer, would you pray? You don't need to pray it out loud. You're not praying to me or those around you. You're praying to God, and he can hear you. But pray something like this. Dear God, thank you for loving me. Thank you for sending your son, Jesus, to die on the cross for me. God, I know that I've done wrong. I know that I'm a sinner. But would you forgive me? Would you come into my life and clean me from the inside out and help me to walk in your ways? Thank you for loving me. Thank you for this gift, this free gift of salvation. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.